Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our May 11th webinar, Finding the Right School for Your Child, A Professional's View. My name is Christine Lai. I am the Executive Director and Co-Founder of Special Education Legal Fund, and I'm so pleased to welcome you to this evening's webinar. First up, I'd like to thank, I'd like to thank our corporate sponsors, our partners that have been supporting us over the past year. Winston Preparatory School at the gold level, American School for the Deaf, Chapel Haven Schleifer Center, Villa Maria, Fusion, and Shrub Oak International School at the silver level, and Eagle Hill School and the Windward School at the bronze level. Thank you so much to our corporate partners. We really would not be able to do what we do without their help and support. So thank you. Just a few words about Special Education Legal Fund for those of you who don't know us. Special Education Legal Fund was founded in 2018 to provide resources and knowledge to families in need with children in the special education system. Our mission is to empower parents and guardians to full advocacy for their students and to level the playing field for families in need. To do that, we have two core programs, the Legal Assistance Program and the Advocacy Support Program, through which we provide legal support and advocacy support to families in Connecticut and Westchester County. I'm going to talk for a couple minutes about the Legal Assistance Program before we begin this webinar. The Legal Assistance Program, as some of you may know, provides up to $5,000 in legal support in a form of a grant through a qualified special education attorney. We review grants on a monthly basis from October through June. We have two more grant cycles this year, May and June. And for families that are interested in starting the process with us, I would suggest you visit our website, which is www.spedlegalfund.org. /programs. It's on the bottom of the page here, and I'll put it up again and as well in the chat. The applicants to the program, families are eligible to apply to the Legal Assistance Program if they have income below 300% of the federal minimum poverty level. Hopefully you can see on the third column here, the column that indicates what that level is for the size of household that, that your family represents. You also must have a child or children with a current individualized education plan and live in Connecticut or Westchester County. The process, as I said, is essentially four parts. First, you would visit our website. You can do this at any time. Submit a pre-screening, which is answering a couple of questions about yourself. If you qualify for the program based upon the answers to your pre-screen, we will send you an application via email, and every application and all the documents is due on the 15th of each month. So we are coming up on the May document deadline, which is May 15th, which I guess is Sunday. After that, all applicants are required to sit down with us for an interview over the phone. You have about a week to complete that after the 15th, the deadline of the 15th. So that's the 22nd. And we notify all families to apply in each month by the end of the month in which they apply. So for May, that would be by May 31st. For June, our last grant cycle of the year, that will be by June 30th. All these dates will repeat again in June. So it'll be June 15th, June 22nd, and notification by June 30th. Let's get started. I'm really excited about this, this subject this evening. Those of you who don't know me don't know that I look at schools. I love to look at schools. It's a good thing because my oldest has been in 8 schools over the course of his educational career. And so I kind of made a little bit of a hobby of looking at different schools, both around our area and actually, like, even when we would go on vacation, like occasionally I would go and just look at a school for fun. I'm really excited to welcome Elaine Morales-Thomason to our panel. Elaine is the founder and director of Emile Educational Consulting, and she really works very, very closely with families and students, both adolescents and emerging adults or young adults, to create a supportive and individualized program for success in their high school and college years. Elaine is incredibly gifted and really really digs down into, into each of our families to determine exactly what the student needs from, both their school and their family, and all the supplemental pieces that have to come together to make an educational placement a success. So welcome, Elaine. And it is Elaine's first time on our panel, so we're excited.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Our second panelist is Katie Conroy-Ciervo from Liston Educational Group of Harris Kramer Liston, excuse me. I'm already stumbling over my words. Katie has, a tremendous depth of expertise about, therapeutic educational programs, wilderness programs, and really loves helping families, figure out what the right placement is for their child. We're really excited to welcome Katie. She's a wonderful, warm, and loving, supportive partner for families. And it's also her first time on the panel. So welcome, Katie. Diane Willcutts is, what is there to say about Diane? I mean, Diane is a tremendous special education advocate. She really is a great advocate and partner for families. I will say that, those of you who are familiar with our advocacy support program, that's a program where we provide, $1,000 in grant support to families who need an advocate to help them in the process. We looked very carefully at the advocates that we were inviting to this program, and the advocates that we invited to participate in this program all had to receive a nomination from special education attorneys in order to be included on the list that we provide to our clients. And Diane actually received 4, special education attorney nominations for this list. She was one of 2 who, who achieved that goal. So we love Diane, and this is Diane's, I don't know, 3rd, 4th, I don't even know, appearance on one of our webinars. So, maybe next time I'll let you do it for me, and I can just kind of hang out. So welcome back, Diane. And our last but not least, we are thrilled to welcome Alisa Rohdie to our panel from the Waverly Group. Alisa is a BCBA at the Waverly Group, one of its co-directors and founders. And for those of you who are wondering, what is a BCBA doing on this panel about, finding the right school for your child, I will tell you that I have known Alisa for, the better part of probably 15 years. And she's been a part of my own team, my son's team, for a number of years, almost 10. And there was a time, that I did not make a move with schools with him without talking to Alisa first and having her vet the program. So she is a BCBA. She's, amazing in what she does. And I really don't know that many people that can pull apart, a behavioral program and, and figure out if it's right for a child. So welcome, Alisa, to our panel. It would not be a, a legal, thing here without a disclaimer. This webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. It is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut and New York. It is not intended to provide legal support or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. If you need the advice, support, or assistance of a special education attorney, you should contact one licensed to practice in Connecticut or New York or the state in which you live to discuss your specific and individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of the participating panelists on this webinar. Finally, for those of you who are on the panel and who are participating and listening and may have questions, I'm going to put my email in the chat. I would like to welcome panelists to, or not panelists, participants to email me with questions for panelists if you have them. Please refrain from asking questions directly in the chat, and please also refrain from asking questions about your specific child and using identifying information about your child, such as name, school district, town, whatever. So if you have questions, please, again, email me. My email is Christine@spedlegalfund.org, and I will put that in the chat in a minute. So here we are, finding the right school, a professional's view. Let me close this. thank you all for joining us. Thank you. Let's see, as I put this in there. Can you, first of all, each one of you kind of, briefly explain your job, educational consultant, advocate, BCBA, and talk about how what your role is in the special education process and in supporting families. Who wants to go first? I said I wasn't going to call on anybody, but Elaine, I'm going to call on you.
Okay, it's funny. I was just about to offer my
Jump in. Oh,
my
good.
participation. So good timing. So I've really developed my practice over 22 years ago, and with the concept of providing support for my families over an educational lifespan of their child. So my target audience is their adolescents and young adults. And I really look at not only just placement, but true educational consulting and therapeutic consulting, as well as college advising within this population to understand if the child were in optimal health, where would they be going? What kinds of conversations would we be having with them? And then if they are off of their path for whatever reason, whether it's neurological or emotional, et cetera, then it's really looking at how do interventions make sense along this larger continuum. So it's guiding my family, supporting my parents through that process, and really quarterbacking that process pretty intimately with clinical teams and educational teams at each of the schools or placements that I'm suggesting. Sometimes it also is working very closely and directly with the student client and helping them understand what, depending on where they are, of course, in the spectrum of wellness, really helping them understand what questions should I be asking as my own advocate. So helping them understand what good decision-making looks like as you really emerge into young adulthood. That's really important part of my work as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Diane, why don't you go next?
Sure. I work as an advocate, which means I help families navigate the special education process. A lot of what I do is trying to identify resources for families, whether it's evaluators or placements or consultants. Very often families come to me and they know exactly which school is right for their child. And so my question at that point is, okay, what information do we need to support your request so that the school district can understand as well and can seriously consider the request? Sometimes they come to me and have no idea. They don't know if they want in district or out of district, or maybe there's an in district program that's not just part of regular ed. And I help them explore possibilities and help them ask the right questions so they can determine whether or not it's a fit for their child.
And you also help families, I mean, sorry to jump in here. You also help families, I know, like understand, like the IEP
The process.
document, the goals, I mean, and that I think is one of the hardest, parts of the process is, is looking at all those words and, and trying to make in this context. I'm like looking at them as like words, and it's like, what do they mean? And looking at them in the context of your child and figuring out like, how does this translate into what happens on a day-to-day basis?
Right. And how does the IEP connect to the actual program that the child has, and making sure that the essential parts of the program are in the IEP, because otherwise it doesn't happen.
Absolutely. Perfect. Thank you so much. Katie, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm kind of in awe of this whole group. I'm like, oh, I want to talk to each one of you about as like a student I'm working with. I kind of play a role differently with each family. I'd say I really am more in the therapeutic lane. And unfortunately, a lot of our kids, no matter what lane they're in, are therapeutic now. I think even if it stems from something of learning disability or trauma, it's they haven't been getting what they've needed. And so there's like the secondary trauma. And so that is a lot of my niche is like, where's the self-esteem been, just slashed, and how do we help build up this child, young adult, back to like who they're supposed to be? And it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's like that Michelangelo saying of like, did you always see the David and make it? But it's like, no, I chipped away all the pieces that weren't them. And that's how I feel like by the time I'm meeting with a family, it's kind of like, how do we take away all these pieces that aren't them? That these labels that have been put on them, or this, these feelings have been put on them. So by the time I'm meeting with families, I'm certainly not the first call. I'm not the first place that they've been. I'm not the first school a lot of the times that they've been to. So just depending on where they are in the process, it's a lot of that like healing and building up self-esteem, and then talking to really smart folks about like, what does this child need academically? Because I'm not a teacher. That's not my strong suit either, but talking to the people who really do know them, what do they need? And then I do know those schools and programs that can fill that niche, if that makes sense. And again, it's supporting parents along the way. And a lot of the times, I mean, I'm a parent of 6 kids. I have been led down the wrong path of my own. And when you're in that situation, your kid's in crisis or your family's in crisis, it's paralyzing. And so for me, it's a lot of it's just kind of helping hold that space so that they can move forward and hopefully trust somebody that is looking out for their family, their child, and advocating for them. And a lot of times, I think by the time families get to a lot of us, they're just have not had that trust in anybody. And it's, so a lot of it's, like I said, just repair and healing and then moving forward.
You bring up an important point, which is that, when a child is in crisis, like the whole family's in crisis, I mean, everyone is suffering. The parents are suffering. The other siblings are suffering. Everyone, no one is functioning well when there's a crisis situation going on. So, I just wanted to, to throw that out there. That was a great kind of point to make. And I find that, like, at least in what we do and what all of you do, I know in what we do, and I know that this is true for you guys, when you can resolve crisis, it's like there's healing for everybody. It's like, the mother can go get a job, because she doesn't have to pick up her kid every day because the school's calling them. The siblings can go to sports again because, it's like, it's a fully holistic healing process. So I love that you brought that up. Thank you so much. And Alisa, last but not least, tell us about what you do at Waverly Group.
So I guess my role is a little bit different because I am a direct practitioner. And at Waverly Group, we work in a multidisciplinary process. So kids who are coming in for an evaluation, we're pulling in whoever could inform that evaluation. And so the goal for us is not a diagnosis per se, but how does that inform us? And I tend to be the one pulled in that's looking at what's the educational environment that's going to support this child. I guess that comes from, I've had lots of different roles in different schools, and it's my favorite part of my job is to look at that roadmap. And I guess second to that is we get called in a lot to do independent educational evaluations, IEEs. And so we're coming in, or I'm coming in as an objective person, and I'm doing what I refer to as a program review. And while it might be under the heading of behavior, it's never restricted to behavior because behavior is informed by everything else that's going on for the child, whether it be language skills or social emotional or social opportunities or expertise of the staff working with the child. So it's super fun part of my position that I really, really enjoy doing. And then I guess, there are clients that my real specialty is intensive early intervention for children with autism. So I've had these guys since they're 2-3 years old and they're growing up, and I'm following them through that time and different trajectory of placements for them.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to pose this question to the group because it's kind of the core of this whole discussion, but what do you consider the 3 most important factors in determining fit between a child and a school?
I'm happy to start with that one. I think this was a theme for my day today. One of the things that I think is really important is to understand need on a holistic level. So, what are the emotional needs? What are the psychological, the needs, and those social needs as well. So what is it in all these critical domain areas? How is a child performing? Where are their strengths and where are their needs? I think another component is barriers to receiving an education or to receiving what they need in those domain areas. That's really important to assess, both barriers that are generated organically within the child or environmental barriers. What's the kind of school setting that's going to be really critical for the child? What kinds of relationships is the child going to need? So in placement, sometimes there's, that idea of, let's say for a high schooler, yes, they are college bound, and there has to be that preparation, which I guess would be my third thing, is where is my client going? So understanding that long-term goal, but really understanding, I think on a deeper level, what kind of environment is going to facilitate the learning and the thriving of a child. Some kids can be, are very motivated by competition and intensity. And I have those clients and they really do well in those environments. And there are other clients that I have that really need a softer touch. They'll still need academic, sort of higher level classes that they can access. And they also need that softer, compassionate, mentor-mentee relationship opportunities. So I would say that those are really, for me, some things that I look at consistently in every case.
Wonderful.
I think it's hard to say three, Christine. I think, and this is a hard one because I think this term gets thrown out too frequently and too casually about individual needs. Everyone's individualizing, right? Like an IEP is an individualized education plan, but truly being honest to the essence of that, of what does this particular child who's in front of you, whether it's your child or your client, what are his or her needs? And the thing about doing that in a pure way is to step away from thinking about the schools that are available, because that really muddies the water.
That's right.
If I could give one piece of advice for parents, it would be, don't pay attention to the reputation or what you've heard, because what might be completely wrong for one learner could be really beneficial to your kid.
Yeah.
Once you go through that truly individualized list, you say, now what is needed to support this, right? Like you start with the ideal, and then you look at what's available and you think, how do you edit? How do you add to it? What are the most important components? So when parents say, like, I heard this about this school or this particular district, I will give the example of, if a parent's looking for, they know that the right place is a specialized school for their child, then it's the district that's more likely to outplace. But another parent might be looking for the district that is going to be the most committed to inclusive education, and least likely to outplace. Those are two very different outcomes. So really going into that individualized list and then looking at what's available.
Right. There are so many questions always, what do you think about this school? What do you think about this school? How is this school? Are they good for that? Or how is this district? What district is good for special education? We were talking about this before we got on. And really, like, it's different for every child. There are children that have great success at some schools and other children that fail miserably at those same schools. There are districts that are great, in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, but the team will change, the school will change, all those things change. And then, it's not a totally, you can't just, blanket say that, a district is good or bad or, whatever. Diane, I know that you, have lots of thoughts about, about that, particularly as relates to the different districts. But I think that's a really important thing to remember is your child and their individual, and their experience at any one of these schools is going to be different than everybody else's experience.
I think for mine, it's a little bit different because it's a lot of the therapeutic piece of it. But my first part is like, can they clinically meet the needs of this child? So given that they academically can, because like I said, I do rely upon people like you guys to let me know what that is, but can they clinically meet the needs of this child? And then the second one for me is the milieu, like who else is there? Are these kids like this child? Like, are they going to find their people, their tribe?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's
they just been in places where they've been left out, or they haven't had friends, or they felt so different. And so are they going to look around being like, gosh, this is how everyone sees me? Or are they going to look around like, I can't keep up? I think so.
Or are they going to look around and say, these are my people.
These are my people. These are my people. And, who works there? For me, that's like, what's important. Can I see, much to your point of like, people say, oh, is this a good school? Well, sure, for that kid, but not for your kid. I mean, it's totally two different children. So for me, it's very, very individualized, and not saying that on the website, but like really knowing their niches. And then the third, I'd have to say, like, is there something that excites them to get out of bed in the morning? Like, is there art? Do they express themselves through art? Is that something they're great at? Or is a sport, or is automobile? I have a kid who's like loves automobile, and there's a class for it. It just makes him so excited to go because it's the one thing he's great at. And so if there's the one thing that feeds them and gives them that little passion, then it's a little bit more helpful than with the other tougher pieces of it, the components. That's 3. I did it. I labeled it in 3.
That was perfect.
And then location. I want them to be at least as close to their family as possible, if option. Yeah.
Diane?
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to break it down by 3. I'll just give you my summary. So just breaking the rules right and left. Yeah, in terms of finding the fit for the student, sometimes it is in district, sometimes it isn't in district. I do caution families when they're saying, what district should I move to for my child? And they get feedback from other families.
On Facebook.
On Facebook.
Yeah.
When one family says, my district is great, what they mean is, my team of these specific teachers and this administrator, those people are great right now for my child. And the thing is staff can change. Your child is different. I mean, as you said, you just never know. So that's part of it. If we're looking at private placements, and it's funny because some parents are adamant, I want my child in district. Sometimes we have to get support from outside consultants to help develop the program in district. And a lot of times if we're hitting a wall, I always say it's easier to get a private placement than it is to develop a good in-district program if it doesn't already exist. So sometimes we are looking at private placements, and it is some of the things people are saying. It's like, what is the population? Are they like my child? Unfortunately, sometimes kids are put in environments where the students are very different. I might have a child who's super anxious, but the district wants to place them in a program where there are a lot of externalizing behaviors. And that's going to make my really anxious student feel more anxious.
More anxious, yeah.
And I've got a lot of schools that are recommended are typically, districts seem to be most willing to outplace when the child is a quote unquote behavior problem.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so my concern is that a lot of times the districts want to put them in quote unquote behavior programs.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of them, and not all of them, but a lot of them have really high rates of restraint and seclusion. And to me, if you've got a lot of restraint and seclusion, you have a failed program. Because basically what you're saying, we only do this if the child is unsafe. You're telling me you can't keep my child safe. So that is one of the really big questions that I ask families to ask. What are the range of disabilities? Are there students with externalizing behaviors? What are your restraint and seclusion rates? And we're fortunate in Connecticut anyway, that the state monitors those numbers. And so
you can go to the website. Yeah, absolutely.
You have to dig on the website
in that information. But it's a good one. It's a really good website.
Yeah. It's a good ed site. Yeah, they track all the data, and the data is there by district, by private special ed school, and it tells you what are the restraint and seclusion rates. And if you know how many kids are in that school, and you're looking at the restraint and seclusions. I mean, some schools have like 50% of the kids have been restrained or secluded or more. So it's just, as I said, that's just one of my big issues when I'm trying to help match kids to programs.
I'm just writing Ed site in the chat because somebody asked.
Yeah.
It is a great website. It is, it's actually, I mean, I have had the pleasure or maybe displeasure of looking at a couple of different states' websites, tracking, the similar thing, because these are all statistics that are required to be reported as part of IDEA. And I have to say that Connecticut's website is by far the best of the states that I have looked at, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. I mean, it really is tremendous. It's Ed site, and I put it in the chat. So I think if you just Google Ed site, or Connecticut or whatever, I can, follow up with that later for the people that are asking in the chat right now. And you can drill down to, seclusion rates at Brian McMahon High School. You can go by school, you can go by district. It's really, really effective. Everybody got to go. And I think everyone, everyone got to answer that question. What are sort of, I'm going to refrain from, asking for specific numbers of things, because there was a little rebellion around that, but what are sort of the, some of the most important questions? I mean, Diane, you kind of, started this with, the questions, I'm wondering if everyone else could circle back to what can parents ask when looking at a placement, or when looking at a school or a program? What are some really pivotal things to know about a program that you're thinking about for your student? Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I'll take it in terms of when we're looking at programs specific for children with autism, right? There'll very often be a BCBA in district. That's required that person's required to design and then supervise and oversee the entire program. And it's really important to know about that person's caseload, because there's a huge difference when you're overseeing 6 comprehensive programs and 60 in 5 different schools, which definitely happens. And so that could be a very, very telling response on the amount of attention that your student will be getting. And then working to make sure that when you receive that information, how can you memorialize what your student needs in the IEP in terms of support from that person? But in general, I think that supervisors, consultants to the program, you want to have an understanding of what amount of time they're able to dedicate to a particular student or program.
Wonderful.
I would say that's across the board. There's one other piece for some of the therapeutic programs that might, that I always ask parents to ask, or I'll ask if if it's a new one, is who is working there during the day on the floor? Is it,
who has eyes on your child?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the times is the therapist, they're only meeting with them once or twice a week for an hour. And the people that are actually spending the day in, day out are not trained. Not at all places, but a lot of them there, or they're, trained in restraining, or so those are kind of questions I'll always tell them to ask. And there was one other one you said, Alisa, and I was going to say
also who is is there a team approach, and how are you looking at the communication between the team? Because you as a parent might be communicating with, one teacher. How does that information get passed to, to everyone on the team, to everyone who touches the child, not just
you reminded me of my second one. Yeah. For therapeutic is their family support, and how often are we meeting with that primary person and our child, so that hopefully that child can come home and the whole family system has been learning the new, whatever structure or boundaries that is. So that was the other part.
Yeah. How often is everyone meeting? Are you all meeting as a team to discuss the progress that my child's been making? Or How often is the communication? Like, what's the communication like? I'm sorry, I'm taking over. Who wants to go next? Elaine?
I think one of the things with therapeutic as well is really looking at what organic transitional programs or step down do they have within the program. I think, anytime it's therapeutic, we're really looking at not only skill acquisition for regulation, et cetera, but then it's also, how do you know that somebody's practiced at that and that a child can be independent to a certain degree with those skills? That's really just tested in real world situations, whether that's in the milieu or whether that's in the local community as well. I think that transitional component is gives everybody, just like home visits as well, Katie, it gives everybody more practice and it gives them more confidence when things are going well, that child really is ready to come home.
What I think is an important point is that it's really okay to ask these questions. I think it could be really uncomfortable for parents to ask about qualifications.
Yeah.
And I understand that it feels like you're questioning someone's
authority or their knowledge,
authority, capabilities. Yeah. Like, I don't have to give you my resume to be your second grade teacher. But in general, it's really important for parents to understand they're not jeopardizing relationships by doing so. And there's a super respectful, collaborative approach to do so. And these are important questions to ask. But I think so often it's like uncomfortable, and parents will say to me, I don't want to upset anyone. Yeah, and I want this to feel like a positive thing. I don't want them to take it out on my child. Right. But there is a way to get information where you're advocating for your child, or you're inquiring on behalf of your child without people feeling threatened. And the truth is, when people are qualified and they feel comfortable, they're just happy to give you the information.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, the other piece too is, I think a lot of times parents feel like they're supposed to know the answers and they feel embarrassed to ask them. So if anything I could say to parents too is, if you don't know the answer, you don't know the answer. It's never embarrassing to ask. Yeah. None of us know all the answers. So we have to ask the question.
How could you possibly know the answer? I mean, I've seen special education attorneys Google like special education law, like in a meeting, so it's like, it's really complicated. Right. It's very complicated and difficult. And you can't be expected to know everything or anything. Just ask the question. It's like, if you don't know what that person does or what their role is, or like how this is going to, suit your child, like you should absolutely 100% ask, for sure.
So there's two things I always say about that, is that you are the only expert on your child in that room, truly, and you should be comfortable relaying that. And you're not supposed to be an expert in that room on anything else. So you don't worry about not knowing the acronyms or what's supposed to go in what box, or asking, what does this ridiculous data that you're presenting to me mean? Because data could be very intimidating to parents, because it's like, oh, that looks super professional. I guess something good's happening.
Right. Look at all those numbers, they're going up or going down or whatever. Yeah. Definitely.
Well, I think another tip that's really important, especially in the age that we're in, where there's a review on everything, and you don't know what the source of the review is. I would say gather, and this is what I tell my clients. I say, okay, well, let's address those. I can tell you what my experience with a program or a school is, and then let's gather your questions and concerns based on the reviews that you're reading, and let's bring that to the discussion with the team at the school. There needs to be that level of transparency. It's so important that parents feel comfortable wherever they're starting in their process. And when they are holding on to concerns for fear of maybe offending,
or their child not getting in. I mean,
or their child not getting in. Yeah. It just, and as was just said, I think when folks are confident in what they're providing, the services they're providing, they'll be able to answer those questions that parents have with specific evidence, and with a certain level of competency that comes across in their tone and their response.
I also,
and I would,
yeah, sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, Diane. No, you
I
go.
was going to say, I would just be careful too. If you're encountering people who are very defensive, I take that as a warning sign that perhaps they aren't as qualified as they need to be.
Right.
That's, and basically you're being polite. You're just saying, just trying to understand, different people have different levels of certification or training. Is my child going to be working with a BCBA and a board certified behavior analyst? And how many children are on that person's caseload? And how much time goes towards my child's program? Is the 20% of the hours of the program that they're getting with the BCBA? Same thing with if it's reading, what certifications does this person have in, say, Orton Gillingham or Wilson instruction?
What level,
of,
because that matters.
What level? Because if you say, a lot of times you'll get the answer, oh, they're Wilson trained or they're Orton Gillingham trained. Those training programs can be 2 or 3 days.
Right.
Whereas actual certification takes years and it involves supervised practicum. So it's very, very different. So I think if you're just very matter of fact about it and say, is my child going to be working with someone with these level of certifications? It's a yes or no answer. And if you're developing an IEP, we ask that goes on page 8 of the IEP on the accommodations and modifications, saying that the person working with the child or providing reading instruction has this certification. And that's a totally fair request.
And I know that this is hard. This is a very hard thing, because I have been through this myself. But, when I'm a really big believer in the square peg, round hole thing, and not about trying to jam a square peg into a round hole. And so when you're going through this process and you're asking these questions, it's not just about does the school want us? It's like, do you want the school? Is this the right place? And if you are getting reactions, I mean, these are all this is all data gathering, right? If you're getting reactions or answers or, anything else that makes you think that, maybe this is a round hole for my square peg, these are important things to know, for everybody. So I really, I think that's that's sort of an important thing, for parents. It's always important to ask. It's always important to ask about the school and, and everything like that. I wanted to ask a question because it's kind of popped up in the chat a little bit, kind of, for everyone, but, specifically for Elaine and Katie, what happens? Do you work with school districts where they're having difficulty finding a placement in the area for a child with a particularly challenging profile? And how do you go about working with a family that's in, an area that's underserved, in terms of, education or therapeutic options?
Mm-hmm.
If that's a big old question, do you want to go first, Elaine? Go ahead.
Sorry. Sure. Happy to. So, yes, I do. I mean, I have some clients that are actually districts. And I've had over my few decades in practice where districts really just run out of options in terms of placements that they know of. So, that relationship's always really interesting because whether it's a family that's hiring me or a district that's hiring me, my work truly is to advocate for my clients' needs. So I'm really upfront with my districts when they are looking to engage my services, because I'm really here to make my recommendations. And I understand that everybody has, constraints, but I have a focus and I have a job to do. Those clients typically are very complicated, both from a psychological perspective, but also they could be complicated neurologically and cognitively. Mm-hmm. So that's that is always a very careful unfolding of how do we even understand, what's my understanding of my client, and then how are we prioritizing need? Sometimes you have to have a priority or two because you are not going to be able to address everything.
All the things. The triage.
That's right.
What is the triage of concern?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So if I don't have medical stabilization within my client, that has to be the first thing that we do, because nothing else will work until we have somebody medically stabilized. So
until we can attend school, or whatever.
Right, right. How do we get somebody really ready to attend school? And when is that appropriate? Depending on their needs, the answer is different for every client.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's like I said, big old question, because it's so different. It's I think a lot of it sometimes is districts will, and I'm not trying to pick on them, but I just feel like sometimes contain the child rather than setting them up in a situation where they're going to thrive. And they are super complicated when it comes like to outplacing them. And sometimes they'll use the same 3 or 4, and those schools will still accept these children that I know can't work with them. I mean, I've seen it happen. And so I think a lot of the times it's just taking in all the resources, the Dianes and the Alisas and everybody, and bringing them into those meetings, and that neuropsych report of it's stating right here, this is what they need. And you're not supplying, it says on their website that school supplies it, but they don't. Like, how are they doing that? And so I think it's being difficult. It's being, really a strong advocate for your child if you're the one going in there for it, but also having all of us or your team and someone who can say that, like, this is what they offer and this is what they don't offer. And we're not going to go through 15 placements again and pull our kid out when they're feeling already lost and not supported. So I get very passionate and upset about that part right there. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Right. And actually, Katie, you made a really helpful comment. A lot of parents rely very heavily on what the website says. And I can tell you that the website is almost irrelevant, because the people who write the website are not the same people who are teaching the child.
Yeah.
And it'll sometimes, one word will catch the parent's attention. They're convinced it's going to be wonderful. Sometimes don't rely on the website. I would say you have to go visit the school so that you can also see the children who are there.
And that's been hard,
that's,
in the last couple of years.
Obviously. I know, but try.
But you have to see the kids. You have to see the kids. You have to see who's like what the peer group is going to look like. Absolutely. I have a question that one of the participants have asked, and I think this is an interesting one, actually. Does it depend what kind of disability your child has in which to determine what school your child goes to? Now, New York is a little bit different because, the classification can determine, placement in some, situations in New York, but I'm not going to talk specifically about New York. I think this is a really interesting question because, there are some schools that, deal primarily with kids on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum, and some schools that very emphatically do not support children on the autism spectrum. I'm just picking autism as a random example, but maybe you could talk about like how a diagnosis of dyslexia, autism, might affect anxiety, might affect the, the placement of where a school of where a child would go.
Well, I mean, at baseline, if we're talking about, let's just use your example of autism, at baseline, we have to really understand what are the services and programs that are provided in the school. I have to look at the social pragmatic support that can be offered for my clients who are on the spectrum. Some schools do a phenomenal job with developing very specific social thinking curriculum, really understanding how do we assess kids who are going to be well served by that program. And then there is progressive support throughout, let's say, 4 years of high school. So some schools do a great job, but I think baseline, you really need to know who are the specialists that are going to be able to address these needs, and can they be either contracted, and what's the track record for for contracting professionals if the school can't provide them. And turnover is tremendous right now.
Yeah.
I mean, it is very hard for schools and clinical programs to hang on to folks. COVID has really wreaked havoc.
Yeah.
So we know that our most vulnerable populations need consistency. So really understanding, you know, what has the turnover in the specialized staff been? How quickly do our schools able to rehire, and who are they rehiring?
Yeah, absolutely. Alisa, did you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, right, there are schools where we know, like, there could be a child who has a formal diagnosis of autism, and the school says outright on their website, we do not accept children with a diagnosis of autism. And in most of those cases, the school's right. The kids shouldn't be there. They're not going to offer the right sort of resources. And some of that's just helping parents understand, like, you might have this notion of the school, but that's actually not where his or her needs are going to be best met. But there are times where that diagnosis isn't capturing the most important essence of what that student needs. And that's when you need really good evaluators, right? Like that, not having a cookie cutter evaluation where someone can really explain why a student might meet criteria for a diagnosis, but actually needs these components of an educational program. And by the way, they happen to match exactly what you're offering here.
Yeah.
So,
and I think your sort of like, you know, position, you know, as providing direct support to a lot of, you know, these students really gives you, you know, a tremendous perspective on like what might work or not work, you know, in a particular environment. You know, it's really hard because, like, you know, I mean, we actually in this area are blessed with, you know, quite a lot in terms of, you know, independent special education, you know, options and therapeutic options that are available. And it's still like, you're lucky if you find a school that, you know, works 70% of the time. A lot of, you know, that's like a win, you know? So, you know, I think that that's, you know, really, really, you know, really, really important to remember. You know, there's been a couple questions in the chat that are sort of around the topic of, you know, you're in a district setting, you know, the district can't support your child. How do you know what the options are out there? You know, how do you know what schools are out there that might be appropriate for your child? There are, you know, I mean, you can start with, like, you know, in Connecticut, the approved list of special education schools, but I think that, you know, most parents, you know, should use that as a jumping off point. How do parents, you know, start that process?
Right, it's tricky. So because
there is no website, there's no resource, you know.
And they used to have a whole booklet. So now they have a list of approved private special ed schools in Connecticut. Obviously, the ones who are not yet approved or who don't want to be approved aren't on that list. This is, you know, basically it's a bureaucratic process they have to go through. There are certain laws entitling the state to look at their finances and things like that. So the private school has to be willing to do all these things in order to be approved. So there's this long list of approved schools. They're not sorted by needs. I don't even think they're sorted by town. You have to go through each one and look to see where they are. And it can, as I said, most people then end up looking at the websites, which don't necessarily provide the information. So a lot of times people will start on Facebook and say, do you know any school that might fit my child? Ultimately, you have to ask a lot of questions, you have to visit. And a lot of times, I mean, people will call me and I'll just give people information about schools if I know about the school. And we'll say, oh no, that one is primarily for kids with intellectual disabilities. Oh no, that school will only accept kids with dyslexia and no other issue, you know, whatever. And at least try to help them weed out certain options. And then of course, there are times when the approved list the right school isn't on the approved list. And so we
Yeah.
have to start looking at schools that aren't on the approved list. We might have to be looking out of state. And, you know, but it's not something that's easily accessible to parents. That information just isn't, it just isn't there unless they are working with an educational consultant, an advocate, an attorney, somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I even have to say, I mean, that's my job, is to know, right? And I travel all over and I visit the schools and I meet the people in the program and I meet the therapists and I meet the teachers and I meet families and I talk to kids away from staff. And I still don't, when someone asks me what's, you know, the best school for someone with dyslexia or autism, I'm like, I need a lot more information. I mean, there's a lot of great schools for them, and it's the individualized piece again. And I do it for a living. So yeah, there is no map and direction for parents to go look, except for the fact that I would say exactly, Diane, what you said, go to the schools, go meet them, go see the kids that are there. Do they feel like your kid? Do you see your kid here? Do you connect with some of the staff? Are they, you know, what you're looking for? Do you feel it when you go there? And if they don't let you tour again, I mean, COVID has changed some things, but it's kind of like being defensive with answers. You know, there's some, I would be iffy about that.
How do you all look at programs? I mean, you know, and particularly Diane, if you could chime in on, you know, sort of what in-district options are there, you know, I mean, and, you know, and it's like, how do you know what's available in your district in terms of, you know, like a specialized placement, or, you know, sometimes there's a therapeutic in-district placement. Like, how do you even, you know, really like know about that? And, you know, Elaine and Katie, and, you know, how do you look at, you know, different, you know, programs, you know, whether they be, you know, therapeutic day, therapeutic residential, you know, wilderness, you know, special education day, special education residential, all these things are so, you know, and Alisa, obviously, you know, I know, you know, you've visited schools on my behalf. So I know how, you know, how we've worked through that process, but, you know, just, I'd love all of you to talk about how, you know, how you know these programs.
Right. I find out about the programs, usually the in-district ones. Sometimes it's on the website, sometimes it's in the student handbook. Very often it's not.
Yeah,
I work in so many districts and have so many students that I've worked with that I eventually end up hearing about programs typically. And I end up visiting them with clients because they're considering the program. I will say with in-district programs, sometimes there are good in-district programs. The difficulty I run into a lot is that if they have a good program, they then screw it up because they'll put too many kids into it.
Yeah.
So it's just, you know, you always have to, again, it's the same thing you do with a private placement. You go, you visit, you see the kids there, you talk, you ask about caseloads, things like that. But sometimes you could go to the director of special ed and say, can you tell me about the other in-district programs? Now, sometimes they will stall you and say, well, that's a PPT decision. I don't see any reason that your child would need anything other than what they have. That's not the least restrictive environment, that kind of thing. And they may not be open about the information. You could also send in a Freedom of Information Act request, you know, and just say that's a law that requires the district to provide public records, and to say that you would like information about all the in-district special education programs, you know, and a description of them and whatever things you can think of, and they're required to provide that information.
So
but that's usually if you hit a wall, though. I wouldn't start off with
I would start off with an FOIA request. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd start off with just asking and then see. And then if you get a no, then do an FOI request. Yeah.
In terms of learning about the programs, we're super lucky at Waverly Group because, I mean, I feel like I have the best job in the world because we do not evaluate a child without observing them in school. We think it's one of the most important pieces of information. So it's not, we don't just get to visit schools as like a visitor. I actually sit in classrooms and see firsthand what's happening. And then separate from that, as you were saying, Christine, well, I'll go and observe, I'll go visit a school specifically through the lens of a student. and I'm looking at the cohort and what's available. And I just would say, in terms of thinking about district and specialized schools, I do want parents to understand that there can be tremendous benefits from in-district when it's working. It's easier to individualize a student's program in district. Yeah. Specialized schools often, like, this is their program and a child gets placed into that program. So if they don't have speech and they don't have OT, and there's nothing you can do about that, and in district we can, it's easier for us to say, hey, we need an outside consultant, or we need more of this service and less of this service.
Yeah.
And so I remind parents of that. And I also think it's great for kids to be in their home districts when they can, because of what that means in terms of accessing the community. When it's not right, it's not right. But I do worry that sometimes parents assume that outplacement or specialized school or private school means it's better. And that is not always the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's an excellent point, because sometimes I will get clients who moved out of district to a private school with the expectation that they were going to really be able to almost dictate terms. Private schools are elective.
Yes.
I have had cases where private schools counsel students out, which is a kind way of saying, we're going to kick you out because you are overtaxing our resources.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you really have to be careful, when you're choosing a school, and if you can, if you're fortunate enough to be able to hire professionals, I would not hesitate to hire professionals. This is what we do. We've been doing this for decades. We know what questions to ask. We really know what to look for. I think that if you are in a situation where your financial resources are more constrained, then I really think it is beginning to look at what has worked for my child, what hasn't worked for my child, creating that list, thinking about which educators were really helpful to allowing my child to, learn with ease, et cetera. So really look at the history. It's one of the first things that I do as a consultant, is I have to understand that history so that I can really begin distilling, well, what has worked and what hasn't worked. We have a lot of information here that we can go with, and then begin understanding and educating yourself on what does a speech and language pathologist do, what does an OT do, so that, again, if you don't have access to hiring professionals, there are things that you can do independently to educate yourself more around what services are out there that you might need to be asking for, and then going armed to those schools when you have those discussions with really specific questions.
You made a great point about, the independent school being an elective decision. I think that, very often parents don't realize that, in this, in kind of the special education, process, it's like, as Alisa said, these schools have a box of students that they serve. And if your child doesn't fit in that box, they are like not going to serve them, that's, period, full stop. I mean, I have seen, in, one particular school, a cohort that came in with 8 students, and the school asked 4 of them to leave, in the course of one academic year, because they couldn't, whatever happened during the course of the year, the behaviors were discovered or whatever, they decided that they couldn't support those kids. And they can do that. They can absolutely ask any child to leave at any time. You have no rights, really, as a parent.
Not true for an approved private special ed school.
That's true.
If the child is placed there through the PPT, they have to have written criteria for when they will exit the child. They can't just toss them out. However, very good point that for a school that is not an approved private special ed school, they can, and the
child's not placed there, in that,
and the child's not placed there through a PPT. All of a sudden, you're in a totally different situation, and it's tough, and they're not even required necessarily to follow the law. depending on what kind of school it is. So yeah, so those are things to take into consideration
when deciding like whether an in-district option is good versus a private, an independent school option. I think it's, what everybody's been saying about, it's a lot of like grunt work, it's a lot of, like looking through websites, Googling, just like, I know that there are some in-district options in my own district that I didn't even hear about. I didn't even know about until after like the process had already sort of, conclude. And it's like, and I live here, and no one, no member of the team, no one thought to tell me about it. I just didn't even think about it, really, like I never even thought about like the in-district option as being something that might work. And so it's really, it's, it's a lot. And I'm sorry to say there is no, magic bullet. There is no website that distills all the schools and all the options down into, easily digestible, searchable database that, that people can peruse. I think that, what we've been discussing in terms of, the advocacy is really, really important. I would like to, kind of address, some of the, the questions that, that have been coming up in the chat group, really about, there was one that, can a parent request a district engage a special education, an education consultant if the options if they're not finding the right options, in the area. And if you guys could address that.
Absolutely, they can.
Yeah. You go ahead.
Oh, no, that's you know this firsthand, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, I only know it from I've had educational lawyers call me saying I've had the district to agree to hire somebody. We're wondering if you could work with this family. So that's the only way that it's happened. That I know about it is through their advocate and fighting for that. And it has happened for some, not many, unfortunately. I don't know, maybe Elaine, you have more experience with that.
Well, I think, so yes, I think the short answer is yes, absolutely. Parents can request that. To get to the point where a district is actually going to hire an educational consultant, they have exhausted all possibilities and have explored everything on their own, including, placing a child at a neighboring state. So it is a lengthy process to get to the point where a district is saying, yes, we're throwing our hands up, we really need a professional.
Yeah.
And in the cases that I have, and I have 2 active cases right now where districts have hired me, the work has been very open. I will say that I've been very welcomed. I run my cases the same way, whether a district or family is hiring me. And I'm spending time with my family privately without a district representative there. It's critical to the integrity of the case and integrity of the work that you proceed in that way. And I have found that districts in a few of my cases have actually asked me to stay on to manage the case because they don't have an expertise in this area that
or
I
the bandwidth to
they
deal
don't.
with it. Yeah.
So many of these relationships with the districts can be very contentious. That's not always the case, which it's really great if you can get to that point. But yes, I would say ask and you are well within your right. Mm-hmm. I have had actually clients put my fees in their legal case, and in some cases my fees were covered by the district. So I think, especially when you're working with an attorney, all things are on the table and you should discuss it with your attorney.
Yeah.
Diane can speak to this much better, but like a backwards way to do that is really through the IEE process, right? As long as you're working with evaluators who are really looking at this objectively in terms of placement for a child. And that can be hard to find, but that is certainly a way to get people involved.
I mean, this is
Outside
a
expert.
topic for an entirely different
I know.
full, webinar, but I think it's it's like, when you look at, an IEE for a child, from an independent educational evaluation, there's IEEs and then there's IEEs, right? I have seen, 6-page IEEs and I've seen 60-page IEEs, and I can tell you which one is better. I've seen evaluators that will recommend schools specifically, and then evaluators that will not specifically recommend schools. So part of that, is, it's really, really hard, for, parent, because it's like, and like, no one, listen, like, no districts want to give IEEs right now. Like that's not a secret. And then when they do, I think, very often we feel like, we've won won the lottery and you got it and, whatever, but, they can be very, very different things. Coming from, someone that's truly independent and is truly looking at, what's best for the child, or, a more sort of, cookie cutter, type of situation. But absolutely, that's a way to, to kind of, back it, I mean, the IE is the expert opinion that is going to, support the case for outplacement, whether it be, in the district, out of the district, private, residential, whatever. Like that's what, is really the linchpin of that.
Yeah, and just as a caution, some evaluators will never recommend private placement. They feel like it's not their role. So that's another question parents have to ask up front to the evaluator and say, if you think this is needed, if you think residential is needed, if you think a private placement is needed, would you recommend it? And that answer can rule out a lot of evaluators, because if they're totally focused on the child and they truly think it's needed, they absolutely need to recommend it. And if they're not willing to do that, better to know that up front. And
then to get the report and be disappointed at the end when you're reading it and it has nothing but like, generic boilerplate.
A lot of accommodations, a lot of accommodations.
Yes. Nothing specific about like, the program, and then there's some that will write, it's like, a small size, but I mean, it's, it really runs the gamut, but absolutely, Diane, that's 100% the, the case. All of these things, it's like every question we are addressing right now is like, is expanding into, another full webinar of,
I was just about to say that we could do a whole other
webinar about
evaluations alone.
All of these questions. I really, it's 8:15. And what I'd like everyone to do is, all of you to do, and I won't give you, a number, but, what are the, what are the 3 crucial things, that a parent should know about any school before deciding on a placement for their child? Go. Absolutely crucial things to know. Alisa?
I don't, mine are going to, I think you need to know how the school formally partners with parents. I think it's an essential piece for the learner, and how there's continuity between home and school, and how there's generalization between home and school, and how the parent's going to feel about partnering with the school. I think you need to know about the cohort, because it could look so different one year from the next on who's coming in with your kid, whatever kind of specialized program you're looking at. And then the third is, I'm going to go right back to those individual needs. What is the most important components for your kid in a school, and how can the school answer? How is that being provided? But those 3 crucial things should be different for every single kid that we talk about. That's the thing. There is no there's not the same three things for any kid.
None.
Other than you have to believe that they can be successful there, right?
Mhm.
And what will allow for that.
Wants to go next?
Well, I mean, I think it kind of goes back the same thing I said before, is either that the supports are there and in place, that they can actually do what they say they can do, not what their website says. Whether that's clinical, educational, and then same thing, the cohort, the milieu, who else is there? How many kids are there? And what's the size of it? Like if your IEE says small classroom sizes, how many kids are in per classroom? And I think it's just, again, not the same for everybody. And the third for me is who's with these children, and can I meet them? Can I see them? And what kind of access do they have to family? Because I think you need to know where your kids are going and who they're spending the most time with. That was kind of more than 3 into 3, but
That's all right. We're not counting.
I think it is a tough question. I think that's why it was met with some silence, because it's so, are we talking private school, public school, clinical placement, traditional, I mean, it's so difficult. I think, when you boil it down, because kids' needs are nuanced, I think you really have to go into understanding fit by first defining what are your parameters, what are your very specific needs, high level, and then drilling down on those needs. I would also say, think short-term and long-term. So for me, I'm working with young adults and in working in the college advising end of this world, it's looking at how do we support our children and decrease structure and increase independence as they move along. If your end game is getting your child ready for independence post high school, whatever that means, and your school or the program that you go to must understand that and support it in appropriate ways that are really defined by the child's needs, not how they are in sometimes I find very general ways, putting programming together and it's one size fits all. That's not going to work. So again, I think individualize is a little bit of a hot word tonight. And I would say, yes, understand specific nuanced needs along that continuum of an education and developmental needs as a child grows older.
Who's left?
Okay, I'll try to do 3. I really resist this.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, basically it
but you love me anyway. It's all right.
Yeah, I do. Basically, you need to know the population that's there. We always ask about range of disabilities and abilities, and I agree 100%. You want to ask, how does this prepare students for life after high school? What supports can we put in place to enable them to be independent for further education, employment, and independent living? And and certainly if we're junior high, high school, we're laser focused on that. And how much time is certified staff spending with my child? So if I'm in a school, is my child being taught by a special ed teacher? Are they being taught by a para, that kind of thing? And ultimately, those are the big pictures. I mean, as everyone keeps saying, there's so much more that you would ask based on the specific needs of the child. But that's just in general.
Katie?
I answered.
Oh my God, I'm losing it.
No, I mean, I mean, if it had to boil it really down to one, is like, are these people going to nurture my child? I mean, even something else might be lacking, but are they going to be cared for? Because if they're cared for, they're going to do whatever they can to give them what they need. I mean, there's no perfect place, but for me, the most important thing is, are they going to nurture them?
Wonderful. And that is a great point on which to end. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us. This was a great discussion, really lively. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. And thank you all so much for, for joining us for this May webinar. Thank you, Alisa, Elaine, Diane, and Katie. This has been a tremendous, and we look forward to our next webinar with everyone. So thank you all so much.
Thank
Have a
you
good
guys
night.
so much.
Thank you.